Hey, happy World Read Aloud Day. My name is Sarah Madrigal. I'm from Amazon Web Services, where I work as an executive assistant. Today, I'm going to be reading you Forces of Destiny by Emma Carlson Byrne. We'll start off with the first story, which is about Ray. This is a short chapter book, so we'll see how far we get in. We have about 15 minutes total, so we'll get as far as we can. The first section is Ray, Sons of Jakku. A message from Maz. I am glad you have come to see me, my friend. Come close, don't be shy. This is my favorite place. Look around you. See the deep, starry sky? I have lived a long time, but I have never grown tired of watching the stars. And here by my fire, sitting on a rock by the lake. And I have tea. Here, help me sprinkle the leaves into my kettle. You must pinch them like so. It brings out the flavor. Spice mycelium. Delicious. Now, we have our tea. You and I have the fire, throwing its orange sparks into the night sky. I know what you have come for. Stories, eh? Tales. Yes, I see that I am right. And oh, my friend, I have tales to tell. Stories about true heroes. I've certainly known more than a few around the galaxy. Lean close and listen. Learn what it takes to be a hero. And remember, the choices we make, the actions we take, the moments, both big and small, shape us into forces of destiny. Chapter 1. Ray strode through the Jakku desert, her boots sinking into the sand, soft as powder, staff slung on her back. The little astromech droid she'd just rescued, BB-8, rolled by her side. Tito had picked up the droid and tied him in a net on the side of his lug beast. Tito's were unpredictable, so it was lucky this one had listened when Ray told him to drop the astromech. You never knew with them. Ray glanced down at the droid, his spherical body rolling along with his little head balanced on top. He was smeared with dirt, but at least his bent antenna was fixed, thanks to Ray. How'd Tito find you? She asked him. The droid whirred at her briefly. Ray snorted. Oh, classified. Got it. Big secret. BB-8 beeped softly. Ray paused. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard a thank you from someone. You're welcome, she said stiffly. BB-8 sped up by her side and let out a gentle buzz. Ray glanced down at the round droid without realizing it. She'd been speed walking towards the AT-AT she called home. She slowed her stride. Sorry, little guy, I'm not used to walking with someone else. That was true, she reflected. She was always alone, whether she was working, selling her scrap at the junk dealer Unkar Plut, or at home in the AT-AT. Even when she was around others, like Nima Outpost, she was still alone. Until now. It felt odd, walking through the desert with someone else after so much time alone. Odd, but not bad. Actually, it felt kind of nice, like having a friend, or family. But the sky was darkening to dusky purple, and she was hungry. Unkar Plut had given her only 1/4 food portion for her junk that day, even though she had found especially valuable starship parts. Ray stopped and bent down. Nima Outpost is northwest from here, okay? She pointed to the distant crags that marked the village. It takes me a couple hours on my speeder. It'll take you longer, but the terrain is flat. Just hold straight and you'll hit it eventually. She looked down at the droid's little white head, and a funny feeling rose in her throat. She swallowed it down and patted him firmly. Take care, okay? And watch out for night watcher worms. The old scavengers say the worms can sense the vibrations in the sand, track people who might be parking ships or speeders. Then they eat the junk. There are lots of them around here. She'd never seen a whole night watcher in the flesh. Few had. Some people called them sand borers. One old scavenger called them Arconan night terrors. They usually stayed under the sand, but once or twice, coming back from a late run, she'd seen a pair of big red eyes blinking at her from just above the surface. That was a night watcher worm. And though Ray knew she wasn't in danger, her speeder and her net of junk were. She always shivered and hurried on. She didn't want any of her stuff to be that thing's meal. BB-8 beeped indignantly. I know you're not junk, but they might mistake you for it anyway, so just be on the lookout, okay? Ray turned on her heel, willing herself not to look back. A whirring sound came from behind her. Ray stopped and turned around. BB-8 stood alone in the vast desert, his head drooping. He looked at her and let out a sad little beep. Ray sighed. Okay, okay. You can stay with me, just for tonight. I'll take you to the outpost in the morning. Chapter 2. BB-8 rolled happily by her side as the massive Jakku sun slid down below the horizon. Burning orange and red, the AT-AT rose like a lump in the distance. Ray's stomach rumbled, and she thought of the food that she had eaten earlier. A quarter portion. She had to find a way to get more. The whirring stopped, and she realized BB-8 was no longer by her side. Ray turned. The droid was staring at something in the sand. BB-8, come on, Ray called. The night wind kicked up, whipping strands of her hair in her face. We don't want to be out in the plains after dark. The droid beeped urgently. Wait, what do you see? Ray stopped, short, her pulse quickening. Two red lights popped up from the sand, and just as quickly they disappeared. Ray's hand crept towards the staff on her back. Delicately, she slipped the strap off her shoulder and tightened her hands around the staff, holding it ready. Don't move, she muttered. Just don't move. That's a night watcher worm. I told you it feeds on junk. The droid let out one frightened squeak, then kept perfectly still. Ray held her breath. The eyes popped up again. She could see the head now, like an upside-down triangle with two blinking eyes sticking out at either end. They waited. Ray's heart was pounding so hard she wondered if the night watcher could hear it. She could almost feel its long, coiled body waiting under the sand where they stood. A moment stretched out, long and quiet. BB-8 remained frozen. Not even his antennae quivered. The sand rippled. The red eyes zoomed towards them. Now we run, Ray shouted as she sprinted as fast as she could towards her AT-AT home. BB-8 rolled along quickly at her side. The soft sand slipped and slid under her feet as she stumbled, almost falling. BB-8 pushed himself against her, and for an instant she clung to his round head. Thanks, you're a true friend, Ray gasped. The BB-8 beeped as his whirring accelerated into a high-pitched whine. The ground rolled again as the night watcher rumbled under the sand. It probably hasn't eaten today. Hurry, we need to find something else to feed it. Ray's mind raced. The AT-AT would do the trick. It had plenty of rusty beams and panels. The worm wouldn't need much. They would just have to get there in time. Suddenly the worm shot into the air ahead of them like a starship blasting out of the sand. BB-8 slid to a halt, beeping frantically. Ray pulled up, whipping her staff in front of her and the droid. Her eyes bulged. The scavengers hadn't lied. The worm was massive. Its shiny plated coils heaved as it whipped up its head around. Its blinking eyes drew a bead on them, and Ray sucked in a breath. BB-8, this way, she shouted. BB-8 sped up, bumping Ray and almost knocking her into the sand. The worm whipped up into the air and landed on the sand with a slap. It shot towards BB-8. The droid let out a high-pitched whine as he zigzagged, trying to avoid the worm's gaping black maw. The worm lunged and snapped, missing BB-8 by centimeters as the droid sped across the sand. Ray waved her staff as high as she could, hoping to draw the worm's attention. Hey, she screamed. Over here, look! The worm's head swung in her direction, and it paused. Ray and BB-8 held perfectly still. Then the worm sank back under the sand, as if sucked into the depths of the earth. Silence. BB-8 rolled closely to Ray's side and pressed against her. Ray listened. No sound except the whisper of the evening breeze. The droid beeped quietly. Foom! Before Ray could answer, the worm exploded out of the sand, writhing against the twilight sky. Chapter 3. Nope, Ray shouted. Actually, it's not done with us. Let's go. They took off towards the AT-AT again. Faster! Faster! Come on! Ray screamed silently. Her breath whistled in her chest, and cramping pain shot up and down her side. The worm slithered behind them, scraping over the sand. BB-8 wasn't next to her. Where was he? Ray whipped around. The little droid stood alone, as if frozen. The worm loomed over BB-8, its jaws wide, its tongues wiggling, poised to strike. Not today, Ray shouted, just as the creature lunged forward. She shoved her staff vertically into its jaws, cramming the weapon hard against the roof of its mouth, and sensing instead of hearing its screech of pain and surprise. Immediately, she regretted the move. Now she had no staff, which meant no protection. Ray shoved BB-8. Get going, she ordered. Ray shot a glance over her shoulder as they ran. The worm was thrashing back and forth with the staff holding its mouth open. She could see the staff bending more, a little more, into a U shape. Suddenly the staff shot out of the worm's mouth. Ray flung herself forward, grabbing at the staff. The spinning stick thumped into her hands as she landed neatly, feet apart, body poised. And thank you. Keep moving, BB-8. As BB-8 beeped as he rolled. The worm disappeared again, burrowing and racing, the sand rippling above it like a river. The AT-AT was nearer. Ray could see its familiar shape silhouetted against the sky. Ray put her head down and clenched her teeth, charging towards it. They were almost there, almost to the walker, almost to the junk that would satisfy the worm. The sand moved like an arrow. The worm was tracking them underground. Ray stopped and turned sharply, hoping to throw the creature off, but the rolling sand headed straight for BB-8. BB-8, wait, no! Before she could grab the droid, the worm erupted out of the sand and in one swift movement grabbed BB-8 in its jaws and sucked him down under the surface. The droid's panicked beeps were suddenly silenced. No! Ray screamed. She forced herself to stop running. Still, she had to stay still. She wasn't going to lose her new friend to a hungry worm. She closed her eyes, drew in a big breath, and let it go. She imagined in her mind, focusing down to a narrow pinhole of light. She thought of nothing but the worm. Where was the worm? The worm didn't want to hurt BB-8. It was just an animal. It was hungry. It was another living thing, and it just wanted to find food, like she did. She and the worm were the same, sort of. Ray felt a twinge of compassion for the hungry worm, and suddenly a thin thread flung itself like a lifeline from her mind, straight into the worm. There! It was right by the AT-AT, right by the junk. Panting, Ray ran to the spot on the ground where she had sensed the worm was. Ray raised her staff in the air. The stick felt like part of her body. It would do her bidding. The staff plunged down into the hot sand. Thunk! The staff hit something hard. The worm's head. The worm reared out of the ground in front of her, knocking Ray off her feet. It rose mightily into the sky, thrashing its head back and forth, its red eyes glowing. BB-8 was clenched in its jaws, but the droid was still functioning. Ray could see his lights blinking. Ray charged forward. She wasn't thinking. She was all bone and muscle. The worm's head snaked along the ground towards her. This was it, right now, before it disappeared again. Hang on, BB-8! Ray shouted. She jammed her staff into the worm's open mouth, wedging it behind the droid's body. The worm whipped its head around, and Ray almost lost her grip as its blue saliva flowed over her hand. BB-8 beeped faintly for help. Hang on, she said again. Ray grunted as she pushed on the staff. The worm's jaws were clamped tight, but the droid's round body was slippery. If she could just pop him out. Ray gave a mighty shove on the staff, and BB-8 suddenly sailed out of the worm's mouth, arcing through the air and landing with a thump on the sand. The worm snapped its jaws closed and shot across the sand towards its lost prey. Her breath whistling in her ears, Ray raced to BB-8, picked him up, and with all her might, hoisted him on top of a rusting part of her AT-AT home, where he had landed with a hollow thunk. She scrambled up behind him. The night watcher looked upon them, its massive body quiet. It looked almost sad. Stay back, she cautioned the slime-covered droid, and she worked her staff behind some rusted panels. 1, 2, 3. A beam clattered down with the panels. That was good. It could have that one too. And another one fell. Ray shoved the junk into the sand right at the worm's face. Here, I know you're hungry. Take this. The worm sank into the sand and sucked some of the junk under, devouring it. Ray crouched beside BB-8 and listened to the crunching and gnashing under the sand. BB-8 still dripped blue goo. Okay? Ray whispered to him. The droid whirred softly. I'm glad that goo is your only problem. Ray put her arm around BB-8, and together they watched the sand as the buried worm sucked down the last panel. We're safe now, Ray let out a breath. She straightened slowly, feeling as if she'd been pummeled all over. Welcome to Jakku, she told BB-8. Ray hauled up her staff, also coated with worm slime. How about we clean up a little? The droid beeped twice. How did I find you under the sand? Ray hesitated. Concentrating. It was hard to explain. She'd never told anyone about it before. I'm just lucky, I guess. Then she grinned at the astromech. Unlike you, my little friend. The droid spun rapidly, splashing a string of blue Night Watcher goo across Ray's face. Hey! Ray wiped the goo off with her arm. Watch it! The droid beeped and rolled forward. Ray followed, smiling a little to herself. She jumped lightly onto the sand and set BB-8 down beside her. Now let's go get you cleaned up. The AT-AT hatch was just ahead. Home, some food, and funny, a friend too. Friend, she liked the sound of that. All right, we're right at 15 minutes. We'll stop there. We're at chapter 4. Thank you all for reading with me today. I hope you all spend some time with your family and friends and read aloud at home. Thank you again. I hope you all have a great week, and remember to keep reading. Thank you.